November 20th, 1962. The White House groundskeeper found them at dawn, wrapped in black plastic like Christmas presents left on the South Lawn. 5 men, 5 bullets, 5 names crossed off a list that President Kennedy had signed personally. Vincent Torino stood in the Oval Office 12 hours later, watching JFK light his 3rd cigar of the morning. The president's hands weren't shaking anymore. That was the part that scared Vinny most. They were supposed to kill Giancana, Kennedy said without looking up. Instead, someone killed them and left them here as a message. The photographs spread across the president's desk told a story that would reshape American history. Each assassin had been execution-style murdered. Each body carried the same calling card, a single playing card, the King of Hearts, tucked into their coat pocket. Sam Giancana was still alive, and he was declaring war. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Tell me you weren't the 6th man, Torino. Kennedy's voice cut through the tobacco smoke like a blade. Vinny kept his face stone still, the way they'd trained him at Glencoe. Never let them see you sweat, even when the President of the United States was asking if you'd betrayed your country. No, sir, Mr. President. I was never assigned to the Giancana operation. It wasn't technically a lie. He'd been assigned to surveil Giancana, not kill him. The distinction felt paper-thin in this room where decisions carved nations. Kennedy finally looked up, those famous eyes now cold as November rain. Then explain to me how 5 of my best men ended up butchered on my lawn while Chicago's most wanted walks free. Vinny had been asking himself the same question since the call came in at 0600. He'd been drinking coffee in his cramped apartment near DuPont Circle when his handler, Frank Morrison, phoned with 2 words, White House. Now. The ride over had been silent except for Morrison's chain smoking and the occasional crackle of the radio. But Vinny's mind had been screaming, because he knew something Morrison didn't. He knew that Sam Giancana was supposed to be dead by his hand 3 nights ago in that warehouse on the south side of Chicago. Instead, the mob boss had walked out alive, and Vinny had let him. The King of Hearts, Kennedy continued, tapping one of the crime scene photos. Mean anything to you? Vinny studied the image. Blood pooled around a man he recognized. Tony Marcello, ex-Marine, deadshot marksman, and until yesterday morning, very much alive. The playing card jutted from Tony's breast pocket like a boutonniere at a funeral. Could be Giancana's signature, Vinny offered. The man's got a sense of theater. Theater. Kennedy laughed, but there was no humor in it. 5 federal agents executed and arranged on the White House lawn like a goddamn art installation, and you call it theater. The truth sat in Vinny's throat like a stone. 3 nights ago he'd had Sam Giancana at gunpoint in that Chicago warehouse. The order was clean, make it look like a rival family hit. Instead, Giancana had said 7 words that changed everything. Your daughter Sarah goes to Georgetown University. Not a threat, a fact. Delivered with the casual precision of a man who knew where to apply pressure. I never touched your girl, Giancana had continued, hands raised but voice steady. But others might, if certain arrangements aren't honored. Vinny had lowered his weapon. In that moment, he'd chosen his daughter's life over his duty to the president. It had seemed simple then. Now, staring at 5 corpses who'd made different choices, the calculus felt more complicated. Sir, Morrison spoke for the first time since they'd entered the Oval Office. We've got teams sweeping every Giancana property from Chicago to Vegas. He can't hide forever. Kennedy stood and walked to the windows overlooking the South Lawn. Crime scene tape still fluttered in the wind where the bodies had been found. He's not hiding, Frank. He's advertising. This was a message. What kind of message? Vinny asked. The president turned back to them, and for a moment, Vinny saw something that chilled him more than the photographs. Kennedy looked relieved. That he knows about Dallas, Kennedy said quietly. The words hung in the air like smoke. Morrison's cigarette froze halfway to his lips. Vinny felt the floor shift beneath his feet. Sir Morrison's voice was barely a whisper. Kennedy returned to his desk and gathered the photographs into a neat stack. Gentlemen, what I'm about to tell you never leaves this room. There are contingencies in place, plans that certain people believe I might implement. Giancana was never just about Chicago, he was about insurance. Vinny's mouth went dry. Insurance against what? Against the possibility that a young president might develop ideas above his station. Kennedy's smile was grim. Sam Giancana knows things that could end this administration. Hell, things that could end this country. And now he's decided to remind me of that fact. Morrison stubbed out his cigarette with shaking fingers. "What are your orders, sir?" Kennedy looked directly at Vinny when he answered. "Find him, bring him in alive, and pray to God we can make a deal before he decides to send more gifts." As they left the Oval Office, Morrison grabbed Vinny's arm in the hallway. "You know something," he said. "It wasn't a question." Vinny pulled free. "I know that 5 good men are dead, and we're no closer to understanding why." But as they walked toward the exit, Vinny's mind was racing, because Kennedy was wrong about one thing. This wasn't just a message about Dallas or insurance or presidential overreach. This was personal. And somehow, Vinny was right in the middle of it. The King of Hearts. In poker, they called it the Suicide King, the only face card where the king appeared to be stabbing himself in the head. Giancana had always been good with symbolism. The drive back to his apartment took 23 minutes through Washington traffic that moved like cold molasses. Vinny counted every red light, every stop sign, every moment that stretched between him and the phone call he needed to make. Morrison had peeled off at the Justice Department, muttering about briefing Hoover, leaving Vinny alone with his thoughts and the weight of what Kennedy had revealed. Dallas. The word echoed in his head, like a gunshot in an empty cathedral. His apartment building on Q Street stood tired and unremarkable between a delicatessen that smelled of pastrami and a dry cleaner that never seemed to have customers. Vinny climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly, his knees reminding him that 15 years of Secret Service work had left their mark. The hallway smelled of cooking onions and old carpet, sounds of life bleeding through thin walls, a baby crying, a radio playing Perry Como, the rhythmic thump of someone walking overhead. Normal sounds, safe sounds. The kind Vinny had been protecting for over a decade, though he'd never lived among them himself. His 1-bedroom apartment was spartanly furnished, a couch that doubled as his bed when nightmares kept him from the bedroom, a kitchen table scarred with cigarette burns from previous tenants, and a single photograph on the mantelpiece. Sarah, at 17, graduation day from Sacred Heart Academy, her smile bright enough to power half of Georgetown. She wore the expression of someone who believed the world would bend to her will through sheer force of intelligence and determination. She'd been right, mostly. Full scholarship to Georgetown, Dean's List every semester, editor of the student newspaper, and completely unaware that her father spent his days in the shadow world that made her bright future possible. Vinny poured 3 fingers of bourbon, Maker's Mark, the same brand his father had drunk every night after his shift at the steel mill, and settled into the chair by the window. From here he could see a slice of Georgetown University's spires, red brick and ivy catching the afternoon light. Sarah was somewhere in those buildings, probably in the library, surrounded by books and dreams and the kind of safety that men like Vinny died to preserve. The phone rang. For a moment Vinny considered not answering. Whatever voice waited on the other end would complicate things, and his life was already complicated enough. But in this business, ignored calls had a way of becoming bigger problems. Torino. Vincent. The voice was cultured, careful, with the faintest trace of an accent that might have been Italian or might have been something else entirely. "I trust your meeting with the president went well." Vinny's grip tightened on the receiver. "Who is this?" "A friend of Sam's, and perhaps, if circumstances allow, a friend of yours." A pause. "Walk to the window, Vincent." Every instinct screamed against it, but Vinny found himself rising, phone cord stretched taut until he could see the street below. A black Cadillac idled at the curb, its windows too dark to see inside. "Beautiful neighborhood," the voice continued. "Good schools, safe streets, the kind of place where a young woman can walk alone at night without fear. Though I understand your Sarah prefers the library to evening strolls." The bourbon glass slipped from Vinny's fingers, hitting the floor with a sound like breaking promises. "If you touch her—" "Vincent, please, we're civilized men. Violence is so inelegant, Besides, Miss Torino is far too valuable to harm. Bright mind, that one. Curious. The kind of reporter this country will need in the years to come. Reporter. Sarah had never mentioned changing her major from pre-law. You seem surprised, the voice observed. Perhaps you and your daughter should spend more time together. Family is so important, don't you think? Though I understand your work keeps you occupied. Through the window, Vinny watched the Cadillac's passenger door open. A man in a gray overcoat stepped out, looked directly up at Vinny's window, and tipped his hat. Even from 3 stories up, Vinny could see the gesture was mockery wrapped in politeness. What do you want? Vinny asked. The same thing you want, Vincent. To keep our families safe, to honor our commitments, to ensure that certain conversations remain private. The voice grew softer, almost paternal. Sam spoke very highly of you after your meeting. Said you were a man who understood priorities. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course not. And that discretion will serve you well in the coming days. You see, Vincent, some stories are too dangerous to tell, some truths too sharp to handle without cutting oneself. A pause. The King of Hearts, for instance. Do you know why they call it the Suicide King? Vinny said nothing. Because sometimes, Vincent, the greatest threat comes from within. Sleep well. The line went dead. Below, the Cadillac pulled away from the curb, disappearing into Washington traffic like smoke dissolving in rain. Vinny stood at the window as shadows lengthened across Q Street, thinking about Sarah, about kings and hearts, about the weight of choices that felt like freedom but left you more trapped than before. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour. The bourbon had soaked into the floorboards, leaving a dark stain that reminded Vinny of blood. He stared at it for a long moment, then walked to the kitchen and retrieved a towel. As he knelt to clean up the mess, his hands trembled, not from fear, but from something worse. Recognition. The voice on the phone had carried the careful cadence of old money and older secrets, but underneath it, Vinny had heard something familiar. A rhythm he'd known for 15 years, though wrapped now in an accent that hadn't been there before. Frank Morrison. The realization hit him like a punch to the solar plexus. His partner, his mentor. The man who'd recruited him out of the Detroit Police Department and taught him that serving your country sometimes meant doing things that would never appear in any official record. Vinny sat back on his heels, towel forgotten in his hands. Morrison had been there for every briefing, every assignment, every moment that had led to that warehouse in Chicago 3 nights ago. Morrison had handed him the file on Giancana, complete with building schematics and guard rotations. Morrison had driven him to the airport and wished him luck with a pat on the shoulder that felt like a benediction. Morrison had known exactly what would happen. The phone rang again. This time, Vinny let it ring 6 times before answering, using the moments to steady his voice. Torino. Vinny? Thank God. Sarah's voice, bright and breathless, cut through his paranoia like sunlight through storm clouds. I've been trying to reach you all day. Relief flooded through him so completely that he had to sit down. Hey, sweetheart, how are classes? That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Her voice carried that excitement he remembered from Christmas mornings when she was little, the sound of discovery. I switched majors, Dad. I'm going into journalism. The word hit him like an echo of the mysterious caller's taunt, the kind of reporter this country will need. When did you decide this? Last week, officially. But I've been thinking about it all semester. Papers rustled in the background. There's so much happening in the world, Dad. So many stories that need to be told. The civil rights movement, the space program, all these rumors about what's really happening in Vietnam. People deserve to know the truth. Truth. Vinny closed his eyes, thinking about 5 dead men wrapped in morning shadows on the White House lawn. Sarah, maybe journalism isn't the safest career? I know that's what you're thinking. Her laugh was warm but determined. But some things are more important than safety, don't you think? Besides, what could happen to a reporter in Washington? It's not like I'm planning to go to war zones. Through the window, another black car cruised slowly down Q Street. Different make, different model, but Vinny found himself noting the license plate anyway. Old habits. Dad? You still there? Yeah, I'm here. He forced warmth into his voice. I'm proud of you, honey. Whatever you want to do. Really? Because I was thinking, Maybe you could help me with my first real story. Professor Kellerman is having us investigate something current, something that matters. And with your connections in government, Vinny's blood turned to ice water. What kind of story? Well, there are all these rumors about the president and organized crime, connections that go back to the election. Professor Kellerman says the best reporters always start with what they know, and I know my father works in intelligence. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. I was thinking maybe you could point me toward some sources. Nothing classified, of course. Just background stuff. The room seemed to tilt around him. Somewhere in Chicago, Sam Giancana was alive because Vinny had chosen his daughter's safety over his duty. Now that same daughter was charging headfirst toward the very story that could destroy them both. Sarah, listen to me very carefully. You need to pick a different story. What? Why? Because... He scrambled for words that wouldn't reveal too much. Because some stories are dangerous. Some truths have sharp edges. The silence stretched long enough that Vinny wondered if the line had gone dead. When Sarah spoke again, her voice carried a new quality. Curiosity sharpened to a razor's edge. Dad, do you know something about President Kennedy and organized crime? The question hung in the air between them like smoke from a gun barrel. In that moment, Vinny understood with crystalline clarity that his old life, the careful compartments, the protective distances, the illusion that he could serve his country and shield his daughter from its darker truths, was over. Sarah had inherited her mother's intelligence and her father's instinct for finding trouble. She would dig into this story whether he helped her or not. And somewhere in Washington, Frank Morrison was orchestrating a game whose rules Vinny was only beginning to understand. The King of Hearts. The Suicide King. Sometimes the greatest threat comes from within. I have to go, Vinny said quietly. Dad, wait. He hung up the phone and walked back to the window. The street below looked the same as always, but everything had changed. His daughter was no longer safe in her ivory tower of books and dreams. She was walking into the same shadow world that had swallowed 5 good men and left them gift-wrapped on the president's lawn. And Vincent Torino, who had spent 15 years protecting strangers, had no idea how to protect the one person who mattered most. The phone sat silent on the kitchen table like an accusation. Vinny stared at it for 20 minutes, replaying Sarah's voice, the excitement that had turned to suspicion, the way she'd said his name at the end, Dad, wait, like she already knew he was running from something. He needed coffee, or bourbon, or a plan that didn't involve watching his daughter walk into the same meat grinder that had chewed up 5 federal agents and spit them out on the White House lawn. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling his apartment with the smell of something normal, something safe. Vinny stood at the counter and tried to convince himself he was overreacting. Sarah was 20 years old, smart enough to stay away from real danger. This was probably just college enthusiasm, the kind that burned bright for a semester before flickering out when professors assigned actual work. But even as he formed the thought, he knew it was wishful thinking. Sarah had never flickered out of anything in her life. The phone rang. Vinny's hand stopped halfway to the coffee pot. 3 rings. 4. On the 5th, he picked up. Torino. Vinny, Jesus Christ, where have you been? Morrison's voice carried genuine concern, or a perfect imitation of it. I've been calling your office for an hour. Had some personal business to handle. Vinny kept his tone neutral, professional. What do you need? Face to face. There's been a development. Morrison paused. How fast can you get to the Mayflower Hotel? The Mayflower, their usual spot for conversations that couldn't happen at headquarters. Vinny had met Morrison there dozens of times over the years, always in the bar, always late enough that the tourists had cleared out and left only serious drinkers and serious conversations. 30 minutes, Vinny said. Room 412. And Vinny? Come alone. The line went dead before Vinny could ask why they weren't meeting in the bar. He stood in his kitchen, holding the receiver, trying to read meaning into Morrison's voice like tea leaves. Concern could be genuine or manufactured. Urgency could be real or theater. After 15 years of partnership, Vinny thought he could tell the difference. He was no longer sure about anything. The drive to the Mayflower took 35 minutes through traffic that crawled like something wounded. Vinny parked 3 blocks away and walked, using the time to scan faces, check reflections in storefront windows, look for surveillance he hoped he wouldn't find. The habits felt rusty, like muscles he hadn't exercised in years. The hotel lobby buzzed with the usual Washington energy. Tourists clutching guidebooks, businessmen in expensive suits talking into phones, women who might have been wives or mistresses or something more dangerous. Vinny took the elevator to the 4th floor, noting the floor indicator's reflection in the polished brass, watching for movement that didn't belong. Room 412 sat at the end of a hallway carpeted in red and gold, the kind of pattern that had probably been elegant in 1925 and now just looked tired. Vinny knocked twice, paused, knocked once more, their old signal from operations that required extra care. Morrison opened the door immediately, as if he'd been standing there waiting. He looked older than he had that morning, lines around his eyes deeper, his usually perfect posture slightly stooped. "Come in, quickly." The room was standard hotel anonymous. Floral bedspread, landscape paintings that meant nothing, furniture designed to be forgotten. But Morrison had pulled the curtains tight and arranged 2 chairs facing each other in the center of the room, well away from the windows. "Sit down, Vinny. We need to talk." "About what?" "About why you let Sam Giancana walk out of that warehouse alive." The words hit the air like a slap. Vinny kept his expression neutral, but his mind raced. Morrison's voice carried no accusation, just weariness, like a priest hearing a confession he'd already anticipated. "I don't know what you mean." Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder, setting it on the small table between their chairs. Chicago PD found blood in the warehouse. Not enough for a body, but enough to suggest someone was hurt. The janitor who found it said there were footprints leading to the loading dock. 2 sets, one large, one smaller. Vinny looked at the folder, but didn't reach for it. Could have been anyone. Could have been. Morrison opened the folder and withdrew a photograph. Black and white, grainy, but clear enough to show 2 figures near a loading dock. One was unmistakably Giancana. The other wore a fedora pulled low, but the height and build were wrong for any of the men who'd been found gift-wrapped on the White House lawn. The other figure looked exactly like Vincent Torino. "The problem," Morrison continued, his voice growing softer, "is that now there are questions. People want to know how Giancana disappeared. People want to know if maybe someone inside made a deal." Vinny met his partner's eyes. "What kind of people?" Morrison's expression was unreadable. "The dangerous kind." Vinny stared at the photograph, his own face looking back at him like a ghost. The image was grainy enough to create doubt, clear enough to destroy him. He could feel Morrison watching, measuring every micro-expression, every tell that 15 years of partnership had taught him to read. "Interesting theory," Vinny said finally. "But theories don't change facts. Giancana's dead. I saw him die." "Did you?" Morrison leaned forward, and for the first time in their partnership, Vinny caught something predatory in his mentor's eyes. "Because the blood spatter analysis suggests otherwise. Clean entry wound, minimal arterial spray. Almost like someone knew exactly where to shoot to create maximum theater with minimum damage." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. Vinny forced himself to remain still, to breathe normally, to project the calm professionalism that had kept him alive through a dozen operations. But his mind was racing through possibilities, calculating exits, measuring the distance to Morrison's service weapon. "You're suggesting I'm a traitor." "I'm suggesting," Morrison said quietly, "that maybe you found yourself in an impossible situation. Maybe Giancana made you an offer you couldn't refuse. Maybe he threatened something precious to you. Sarah." The unspoken name hung between them like smoke. Morrison reached into the folder again and withdrew a second photograph. This one showed Sarah walking across the Georgetown campus, books in her arms, sunlight in her hair. She was laughing at something someone had said, completely unaware that a camera was capturing the moment from 50 yards away. "Beautiful girl," Morrison said. "Bright future ahead of her. Journalism, I hear. Dangerous profession these days. So many ways for young reporters to stumble into trouble." Vinny's hands remained steady on his knees, but inside, something cold and sharp was unfurling. "Are you threatening my daughter, Frank?" "Christ, no." Morrison's expression shifted, showing what looked like genuine hurt. Vinny, we've been partners for 15 years. I'm trying to save your life here, both your lives. He pulled out a third photograph. This one showed Vinny at his apartment window, phone pressed to his ear, while the black Cadillac idled on the street below. The timestamp read yesterday evening. You're being played, Morrison continued. Giancana's people have been watching you since you got back from Chicago. They know you let him walk. They know about Sarah. And they know that makes you a liability to everyone involved. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they formed made Vinny's chest tight with something worse than fear. The phone call yesterday. The voice with the accent. That was you. Morrison's silence was answer enough. Jesus Christ, Frank. Why? Because I needed you to understand the stakes. Morrison stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peer down at the street. The 5 men who went after Giancana, they weren't just federal agents, Vinny. They were good men, family men, and they died because someone leaked their identities, their locations, their operational parameters. Someone? Morrison turned back to face him. Someone with access to the highest levels of the operation. Someone who knew every detail of the mission before it even began. The implication hit Vinny like a physical blow. You think I think, Morrison said carefully, that you're not the only one who made a deal that night in Chicago. I think Sam Giancana walked out of that warehouse with more than his life. I think he walked out with enough information to identify every asset we had in play. Vinny's mind raced back to the warehouse, to the conversation with Giancana, to the moment when everything had gone wrong. The mob boss had known too much, had spoken with the confidence of a man holding all the cards. But Vinny hadn't told him anything. Had he? The building schematics, Vinny said slowly. The guard rotations, the extraction routes. He knew all of it before I arrived. Morrison nodded grimly. Someone fed him our entire operational profile. Someone he trusted enough to fake his own death rather than run. Someone who could guarantee his safety afterward. Someone inside the service. Someone very close to this operation. The weight of it settled on Vinny's shoulders like lead. 5 good men dead because someone had sold them out. Sarah in danger because her father had unknowingly become part of a larger betrayal. And somewhere, Sam Giancana was alive and protected, holding secrets that could topple governments. What do you want me to do? Vinny asked. Morrison sat back down, his expression grave. Help me find the leak. Help me understand what really happened in that warehouse. Help me figure out who's been orchestrating this from the beginning. And Sarah gets protective detail, quietly, until this is resolved. Vinny looked at the photographs spread between them, evidence of surveillance, manipulation, betrayal. Outside, Washington hummed with its usual rhythms of power and ambition, completely unaware that 5 men had died to protect secrets someone else had already sold. There's something else, Morrison said softly. Something you need to know about that night in Chicago. Vinny, wait it, you weren't the only agent in that warehouse. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Vinny felt the ground shift beneath him. 15 years of certainty cracking like ice in spring. What do you mean? Morrison reached into the folder one final time and withdrew a surveillance photo Vinny had never seen. Black and white, shot from an elevated position, probably a building across from the warehouse. The image showed the loading dock, the same scene as the previous photo, but from a different angle. 3 figures this time, not 2. Vinny's blood turned to ice water. The third figure stood in the shadows near a support pillar, positioned with a clear view of both Vinny and Giancana. The face was partially obscured by shadow, but the build, the stance, the way the figure held himself, all unmistakably familiar. You son of a bitch, Vinny whispered. Morrison's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes. Pride, maybe, or satisfaction. You're beginning to understand. Everything was rewriting itself in Vinny's mind. The mission briefing 15 years ago, Morrison insisting Vinny go alone because of his unique qualifications, the perfect intelligence about Giancana's location, the way Morrison had known exactly which arguments would convince Vinny to take the assignment. Your daughter's future depends on this going smoothly. Even then, Morrison had been playing the Sarah card. You were there the whole time, Vinny said, watching, orchestrating. Someone had to ensure the operation succeeded. Morrison's voice carried that patient tone he'd always used when explaining tradecraft to junior agents. The president wanted Giancana eliminated, but some of us understood that a dead mob boss was worth less than a live asset. The warehouse conversation played back in Vinny's memory with horrifying clarity. Giancana's confidence, his knowledge of operational details, the way he'd spoken about Sarah, not as a threat he was making, but as information he'd already possessed. "You gave him my file," Vinny said. "You told him about Sarah before I ever walked into that warehouse." Morrison nodded approvingly, like a teacher whose slow student had finally grasped a difficult concept. Giancana needed motivation to cooperate. You needed motivation to let him live. Everyone got what they needed. 5 federal agents died. 5 agents who would have exposed everything if they'd succeeded. Morrison's mask finally slipped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Men like you and me, we understand necessity, Vinny. We understand that sometimes good people die to serve a greater purpose." Vinny was on his feet before he realized he'd moved, his hand instinctively reaching for the service weapon he hadn't carried in years. Morrison watched the motion with amused detachment. "Still thinking like a field agent. That's what I always admired about you." Morrison remained seated, relaxed, like a man holding 4 aces. "But you're not seeing the bigger picture. Giancana alive and cooperative was worth more to this country than Giancana dead. The intelligence he's provided over the past 15 years has prevented 3 assassination attempts on government officials and disrupted half a dozen Soviet operations. You're CIA. I've always been CIA." Morrison's smile was thin and predatory. The service was just convenient cover. Amazing how much access a Secret Service supervisor has to operational planning. The room seemed to spin around Vinny. 15 years of partnership, of trust, of shared dangers and quiet victories, all of it a lie. Morrison studying him like a laboratory specimen. Morrison pushing the right buttons, pulling the right strings, ensuring his asset remained compliant. "Sarah's journalism ambitions," Vinny said slowly. "That wasn't coincidence." Morrison's smile widened. "Bright girl." A few carefully placed suggestions from her favorite professors, some encouragement to explore stories about government transparency. He shrugged. "Young people are remarkably easy to guide when you understand their idealism." The betrayal was so complete, so thorough, that Vinny felt something break inside his chest. Not just trust, something deeper. The fundamental belief that there were still good men doing necessary work in the shadows. "You orchestrated all of it. The original mission. The fake death. Even Sarah stumbling onto the story now." "Control is an illusion most of the time," Morrison said. "But occasionally, with the right pressure applied at the right moments, you can nudge events in useful directions." Vinny thought about the manila envelope that had started this nightmare. The photographs, the precise timing. "Someone's been watching you too, Frank. Someone knows about your operation." For the first time, Morrison's confidence flickered. Just for a moment, but long enough for Vinny to catch it. "That's why you needed me here," Vinny continued. "Why you're telling me all this now. Your operation is compromised, and you need someone to blame. Someone expendable." Morrison stood slowly, his hand moving toward his jacket. "You always were too smart for your own good, Vinny. Just not smart enough to see who was really pulling the strings." The 2 men faced each other across the anonymous hotel room. 15 years of shared history reduced to this moment of naked calculation. Outside, Washington continued its oblivious dance of power and ambition, while inside room 412, the last illusions of Vincent Torino's old life finally died. Morrison's hand hovered near his jacket, and Vinny could see the calculation in his eyes. The same cold assessment he'd probably made before ordering 5 good men to their deaths. But something had shifted in the room's dynamic. Morrison needed something from him, or Vinny would already be bleeding out on the hotel carpet. "The envelope," Vinny said quietly. "The one that started this whole dance. You didn't send it." Morrison's hand stopped moving. "No." "Which means someone else knows about your little puppet show. Someone with access to classified photographs and a very specific agenda." Vinny took a step closer, reading Morrison's body language like a book written in a language he'd spent decades learning. Someone who wants you exposed. The situation is under control. Is it? Vinny could smell Morrison's fear now, subtle but unmistakable, because from where I'm standing, it looks like your 15-year operation just became someone else's weapon. Morrison finally withdrew his hand from his jacket, but he pulled out a cell phone instead of a gun. We're leaving, together. There's a safe house in Arlington where you can put a bullet in my head and blame everything on the traumatized former agent who couldn't handle the truth about his past. Vinny shook his head. I'm not getting in any car with you, Frank. You don't understand the stakes here. Giancana isn't just an asset anymore. He's a liability with 40 years of government secrets in his head. If the wrong people get to him first— The wrong people? Vinny laughed, but there was no humor in it. Christ, Frank, you are the wrong people. Morrison's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and Vinny watched color drain from his face. Whatever message he'd received, it wasn't good news. They have Sarah, Morrison said quietly. The words hit Vinny like a physical blow, but he forced himself to remain still. Morrison was a master manipulator, and fear made people stupid. Prove it. Morrison turned the phone around. The screen showed a photo of Sarah sitting in what looked like a coffee shop, completely unaware that someone was photographing her through the window. The timestamp read 23 minutes ago. Below the photo, a text message: Old sins cast long shadows. Arlington National Cemetery. Tomb of the unknown soldier, 1 hour. Come alone or the girl learns what Daddy really did in Chicago. Vinny's hands clenched into fists. Who sent this? I don't know. For the first time since Vinny had known him, Morrison sounded genuinely rattled. But they know everything. The warehouse, the fake death, your daughter's involvement. Somehow they've been tracking this operation from the beginning. Maybe they've been tracking you from the beginning. Vinny moved toward the door, but Morrison stepped to block his path. You can't go alone. It's obviously a trap. Everything's been a trap since the moment you sent me to that warehouse. Vinny studied his former partner's face, looking for tells, for signs of deception. But Morrison's fear seemed genuine, the kind of bone-deep terror that came from realizing you weren't the smartest person in the room. Unless this is just another one of your manipulations, another way to control the situation. I swear to you, on my mother's grave, Vinny, I didn't send that message. The oath carried weight. Morrison's mother had been the only person the man had ever genuinely loved, the only topic that could make the cold, professional mask slip. If he was invoking her memory, he was either telling the truth or so desperate that he'd burned his last bridge to credibility. Vinny's mind raced through possibilities. Someone with access to classified files. Someone who knew about Morrison's operation but wasn't part of it. Someone patient enough to wait 15 years before making a move. Giancana, Vinny said suddenly. This isn't about exposing your operation. It's about ending it. He wants out. Morrison shook his head. Sam's been cooperative. Compliant. Why would he? Because 15 years is a long time to live as someone else's puppet. Vinny thought about the voice on the phone, the careful accent that could have been manufactured. Maybe he's tired of being your asset. Maybe he wants to control his own story for once. Morrison's phone buzzed again. Another photo of Sarah, this one from a different angle, showing her leaving the coffee shop and walking toward a metro station. The message was shorter this time, 55 minutes. We need backup, Morrison said, reaching for the hotel phone. I can have a tactical team at Arlington in— No. Vinny grabbed Morrison's wrist, stopping him mid-dial. First rule of hostage situations: follow the instructions exactly. Any deviation puts the target at risk. Then what do you suggest? Vinny looked at his former partner, this man who had manipulated his life for 15 years, who had turned him into an unwitting accomplice in murder and treason. Morrison's mask was completely gone now, revealing something almost human underneath. Fear for Sarah, guilt for the situation he'd created, maybe even genuine regret for the choices that had led them here. I suggest, Vinny said quietly, that you pray whoever's pulling the strings now is more merciful than you were. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Then Morrison's phone rang, not the buzz of a text, but an actual call. The The screen showed no caller ID, just a number that made Morrison's face go white. "Answer it," Vinny said. "Speaker." Morrison's thumb trembled as he swiped the screen. "Hello? Frank Morrison." The voice was gravelly, aged, but carried an authority that filled the hotel room like smoke. Still playing puppet master after all these years? Vinny's blood turned to ice. He knew that voice, older now, weathered by 15 years of hiding, but unmistakable. Sam Giancana, speaking from whatever grave Morrison thought he'd buried him in. Sam Morrison's voice cracked like a teenager's. "We had a deal. We had a prison, Frank. A very comfortable prison, but still a cage." Giancana's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. 15 years of playing your trained monkey, feeding you intelligence, pretending to be grateful for the privilege of breathing your air. Morrison shot a desperate look at Vinny, who remained perfectly still. This was the moment of truth, literally. The past wasn't just colliding with the present, it was detonating like a bomb with a 40-year fuse. "What do you want?" Morrison asked. "What I've always wanted. What you stole from me in that warehouse." Giancana paused, and Vinny could hear traffic in the background, voices speaking in hushed tones. "My life back, my name back, my story told the way it really happened." "You know I can't." "You can't what, Frank? Tell the truth? Admit that the great Sam Giancana outsmarted the entire federal government? That your 15-year operation was built on a foundation of lies and dead bodies?" Vinny stepped closer to the phone. "Where's my daughter?" Another pause. When Giancana spoke again, his voice carried a different tone, almost gentle. "Vincent Torino, the man who chose mercy over duty. She's safe, Vincent, for now. But her safety depends on what happens in the next 47 minutes. What happens at the cemetery." The truth comes out. All of it. The 5 dead agents. Morrison's real identity. The CIA operation that turned a mob boss into America's most protected informant. Giancana's voice hardened again. And the price that good men paid for Frank Morrison's ambition. Morrison lunged for the phone as if he could somehow reach through it and silence the voice that was dismantling his life. "Sam, think about what you're doing. The intelligence you've provided, the lives you've saved." "The lives I've saved?" Giancana's laughter was bitter now. "Frank, I've been feeding you fairy tales for 15 years. Half the intelligence I gave you was fiction. The other half was information you could have gotten from reading the Chicago Tribune." The admission hit Morrison like a physical blow. Vinny watched his former partner crumble, watching 15 years of careful manipulation revealed as an elaborate con game, with Morrison as the mark. "The Soviet operations," Morrison whispered. "The assassination attempts you helped us prevent." "Theater. Beautiful, elaborate theater, designed to keep you convinced I was worth keeping alive." Giancana paused again. "You wanted to believe you were running me, Frank, so I let you believe it. Men like you, men who think they're the smartest person in every room, are remarkably easy to deceive." Vinny understood now. The real puppet master hadn't been Morrison. It had been Giancana all along, playing a game so deep and so patient that even a CIA operative had been fooled. The mob boss had spent 15 years in protective custody, feeding Morrison just enough real intelligence to maintain credibility while planning his escape. "Sarah," Vinny said into the phone, "proof of life. Now." A brief pause, then Sarah's voice, clear and strong. "Dad? Dad, I'm okay. I'm at Arlington, near the—" Her voice cut off abruptly. "She's unharmed," Giancana said, "and she'll stay that way if Frank Morrison does exactly what I tell him to do." Morrison looked like a man watching his world burn. "What do you want?" "I want you to walk into that cemetery and confess. To her, to Vincent, to the world if necessary." Giancana's voice carried the weight of 15 years of suppressed rage. "I want you to tell the truth about the 5 men who died because you fed me their operational details. I want you to explain how you turned a sanctioned assassination into a recruitment operation. And I want you to admit that every day for 15 years, you've been the unwitting asset of the man you thought you were controlling." Morrison closed his eyes. "And then? Then we see how merciful I'm feeling." The line went dead, leaving Morrison and Vinny alone with the ruins of everything they'd believed about the past 15 years. Morrison's greatest strength, his need to control every variable, had become his fatal weakness. He'd been so convinced of his own superiority that he'd never considered the possibility that his asset was playing an even deeper game. Vinny moved toward the door. 45 minutes. Vinny. No. Vinny turned back, and Morrison saw something in his eyes that made him step backward. No more lies, Frank. No more manipulation. We're going to walk into that cemetery and you're going to tell the truth. All of it. And if I refuse? Vinny's smile was cold as winter. Then I'll tell it for you. The tomb of the unknown soldier stood silent under the gray November sky, its marble whiteness stark against the rolling hills of Arlington. Vinny arrived first, positioned himself where he could see Morrison approaching from the east entrance, the same careful positioning he'd learned 15 years ago, back when he still believed in the mission. Sarah sat on a bench near the memorial, reading what looked like a newspaper, but constantly glancing at her phone. She hadn't seen him yet, probably didn't even know why she was really here, still playing her part in someone else's chess game. Morrison appeared precisely on time, walking with that measured stride Vinny remembered from 100 briefings. Even now, even knowing his world was collapsing, Frank Morrison maintained the illusion of control. It was pathetic and admirable in equal measure. Vincent Morrison's voice carried across the memorial plaza like a confession. You came. Did I have a choice? Vinny watched his former partner's face, looking for signs of deception. But Morrison looked like exactly what he was, a man who'd spent 15 years believing he was the smartest person in the room, only to discover he'd been the fool all along. Sarah looked up from her paper, confusion flickering across her features as she recognized her father. Dad, what are you doing here? Before Vinny could answer, Sam Giancana emerged from behind the memorial. 15 years older, hair completely white now, but still carrying himself with that unmistakable authority. He looked like exactly what he'd always been, a man who understood power better than the people who thought they were wielding it. Hello, Vincent, Giancana said quietly. Thank you for coming. Morrison stepped forward, instinctively positioning himself between Sarah and the man he'd thought was his asset. Sam, let her go. Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with the truth, Frank. Something you've never been particularly comfortable with. Giancana's voice carried the weight of 15 years of patient fury. Tell her. Tell them both what really happened in Chicago. Sarah stood slowly, her reporter's instincts finally connecting the pieces. You're Sam Giancana, but you're supposed to be dead. Yes. Your father helped me with that small deception. Giancana's smile was thin as paper, though he didn't know who he was really working for at the time. Morrison's mask finally cracked completely. I was protecting national security. The intelligence Sam provided saved lives. Stop. Giancana's voice cut through Morrison's justification like a blade. Tell them about the 5 men, Frank. Tell them about the photographs. Tell them about the real reason JFK wanted me dead. Vinny watched Morrison's face crumble, watched 15 years of carefully constructed lies collapse under their own weight. This was what resolution looked like, not victory or defeat, but simply the moment when all the debts came due. The president ordered a sanctioned elimination, Morrison began slowly, his voice barely audible. 5 agents were selected for the operation. But I knew that a dead mob boss was worth less than a live asset. Sarah's face went pale. You betrayed your own people. I served my country. Morrison's voice gained strength, as if repeating the justification could make it true. Giancana had connections, intelligence networks, access to information that could prevent Soviet operations on American soil. And the 5 agents? Vinny's voice was steady, professional, the way it had sounded in briefing rooms 15 years ago. Morrison closed his eyes. I provided Sam with operational details. Timing, weapons, approach vectors, escape routes. A pause. He was supposed to disappear, fake his death, and become our protected asset. Instead, 5 good men died, Giancana said quietly. And I spent 15 years in a cage, pretending to be grateful for the privilege. The November wind cut across the memorial plaza, carrying the weight of old sins and older secrets. Vinny looked at his daughter, saw her processing the revelation that her father had been an unwitting accomplice to treason. saw Morrison standing like a man at his own execution, finally understanding that his greatest strength had been his fatal weakness. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. Giancana studied each of them in turn, Morrison with contempt, Sarah with something approaching kindness, and Vinny with what might have been respect. "Now you tell the story, the real story, about power and manipulation and the price that good people pay when they trust the wrong voices." He turned and began walking away, moving with the measured pace of a man who had outlived his enemies and outlasted their schemes. The 5 agents deserve better than unmarked graves and classified files. Their families deserve the truth. Vinny watched him go, understanding that some debts could never be fully paid, only acknowledged, only carried, only remembered by the people left behind to count the cost. Morrison stood alone now, abandoned by his asset, exposed by his lies, facing the ruin of everything he'd built. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of 15 years' worth of accumulated betrayals. Sarah moved closer to her father, and Vinny felt something settle in his chest. Not forgiveness, that would take time. Not peace, that might never come. But understanding finally. About the price of secrets and the weight of choices made in dark rooms by people who thought they were saving the world. The tomb of the unknown soldier stood silent above them, witness to all the unnamed costs of necessary wars.